Hey, what's up, my brewing fans here? I am back for another video on basically going through all the abbreviations of brewing. I've done this for a few years. Actually, I've done it for more than that, 25 so years, but I did not even pay attention to all the different things you can do in brewing, abbreviations and everything until the last few years. And I decided I'm going to do a video on this, and I want to start going through all the different definitions and explaining them. But before I start, I'm gonna pour myself a beer. Alright, what do we got here? We got Naughty Neighbor. If you guys haven't tried this beer is really good. It's an APA, American Pale Ale. Naughty Neighbor is in Burlington. They're a great brewery, Nickelbrook, and they have many different beers. They have all sorts of APAs, IPAs, sours. They've really done a good job, and is a craft brewer in Ontario. Good job, Burlington. This one here I found about a year and a half, 2 years ago, and it actually inspired me to maybe 3 years ago to get into craft brewing. I mean, I've done homebrew for a while, but I was just trying to mimic, like I've said before, Budweiser, Canadian, Coors, Blue. Yeah, why bother, right? Those are lagers first of all, well, and pilsners, but they are, believe it or not, hard to mimic because they are a lager. And lagers are hard. Ales aren't as hard. Everybody can do ales at home. And there's a lot of friends I have that go, well, I don't like ales. I don't like ales. No, they're too harsh. I'm a lager guy. That's because they're programmed. This is an ale, and a lot of ales are amazing. Hey, lagers are amazing. I am going to do a lager in my next brew video because it's a challenge. Hey, I've never done a lager before. And the reason that lagers are a challenge is you have to actually ferment them at a really low temperature. And most home brewers, they're fermenting at whatever their house is, 70 degrees, 75 degrees. And ales will ferment at that, but they give off a lot of esters and different flavors. This is an ale, and it is an amazing ale. I'm just going to pour it out here. And it is crisp, and I really like it. It is... you can't say it's crisp, clean, and fresh like a lager, but it is very crisp on the end of the palate. But the smell, oh, I just fell into a grapefruit. Delicious. Oh, and by the way, I don't know if you can see this here. I'm just going to give a shout out to these guys. They're in Guelph, and they are a great brew place, urban winery and craft brewing supplies. I don't want to say drop the urban winery part because people make wine, but craft brewing is where it's at. And I go to a few places in around my area. I live in Georgetown, Ontario, and I go to Brampton for some of my supplies. And I go to Toronto Brewing Supplies out in Dufferin and Shepherd area. They're awesome, those guys. But these guys here, they're in Guelph, Victoria Street and Highway 7, where that, I don't know what they call Highway 7, that area there. Those guys are awesome. The last time I went there, the girl there, she couldn't be older than 22 or 23, and I was saying I'm going to try doing a lager for my first time. And she said, "Oh, don't worry, don't forget to do the diacetyl rest." Like, you know about the diacetyl rest? Oh my God! Like, every other brewery place I've gone to just doesn't even mention that. They're like, "Oh, cool, you're gonna do this, you're gonna do that." They didn't even talk about that. Diacetyl rest. This place is great. Urban and wine. What is this? Urban. I'm trying to establish urban winery in craft brew, KJ Juice. I think it's KJ Juices, but they are awesome. I really like going there. Like I said, I don't have the address with me right now. I'm just doing this off the top of my head. And again, I'm going to put that on there. You can see that. And They're in Guelph. Cheers. And again, I was saying about this here. If I can get this lid up here. There you go. Naughty Neighbor. Delicious beer made by Nickelbrook. Give cheers out to them too. Okay, so before I drink too much beer, glossary of terms is what I wanted to talk about today. This is what got me confused when I first started brewing. Let's talk about gravity. Okay, so what? Just gonna talk about gravity right here. I'm just gonna read what this is quickly. In brewing terminology, gravity refers to the density of wort. So remember I talked about wort, and I'm not gonna read the rest of this, but when I make wort, not wart, like a wart in your finger, W-O-R-T, wort, W-O-R-T, that's the sugar mass that becomes beer. So once you've gone and steeped the grains, basically, which is mashing the grains, and pulled all the sugar out of them, you've got wort. Wort is basically the sugar, water, plus the hops, because there's 4 things that make a beer. First one, water. Water is very important, and I'm going to talk about water later on in another video. I have not wrapped my head around water. Water is extremely complex. Water. Grains. We're talking about grains, we're talking about malted grains, like barley, malted barley. You know, and I'm not even going into how barley's malted till another time, but malted barley is the second one. Right? You get hops. Hops are like the if you're cooking a stew or you're doing a spaghetti and you're adding all those ingredients in that are like basil and cumin and all these different things that are in the spices. Basically, hops are the spices of beer. Right? They make the aroma and the bitterness. Hops are very important. Then you got yeast. Yeast, I think, is probably the most important thing in beer. People are going to argue and say, no, it's not, it's this, and this. I love to cook. Right? I cook at home. I'm the one who cooks. I'm the chef at home. And so, as far as I'm concerned, yeast is the chef. Because a brewmaster, they make the wort. What is a wort? Wort is taking the hops and the barley and the water and making this concoction that is going to be beer, but it's not beer yet. It's just a sugary little flavor of whatever. You drink it, yeah, it tastes delicious. And it isn't alcohol yet. Yeast takes all of that and transforms it into beer. And if you don't pick your yeast right and you don't make your yeast happy when you make your beer, you're going to have a different beer than you thought you were going to have. So I think yeast is the most important thing out of them all. But I digress. I've gone off of what gravity is. So gravity is basically how much sugar is in the wort. It's going to be how much alcohol you're going to get. Okay? It's the density of your wort. And look at the next thing here, grist. The grist is all the grains that are added to the mash to make the beer. These terms can be a little confusing. Okay? So you take all the grains, you put them into a mash, and we haven't even talked about mashing yet, and that's going to give you what makes beer. It's a little confusing when you hear about that. So basically, you put everything together and you mush it up, and you're going to get beer out of it. So some of these terms they use are really confusing, and some of them are more for commercial brewers than they are for brewers like myself. Hops, I think I can explain what a hop is. They're basically a vegetable. They're something that is grown like using. Some people have actually used like the tops of roots and different things. I'm trying to think of the name. Things that are bitter in their gardens, and like dandelion leaves, and they've made hops out of that. They're not hops, but they're bittering agents, and they add that bitterness flavor because think about you ever had Chinese food, and I bet you 99.9% of the world has had Chinese food. Sweet and sour, right? Well, hops in beer is like the sweet and sour. Hops you could think of as a sour. The sweetness is the malt. You want to make sure your malt has enough sweetness to it to balance out the hops bitterness. There's your sweet and sour. That's your hops. Husk. Talking about husk. They're going into barley. I think these are all in alphabetical order of what I'm reading here right now. I may have even actually missed a page here as I go. Yeah, I did too. Anyways, we'll keep on going. The husk is the barley, unlike wheat, has a papery husk that surrounds the kernel. So it's what surrounds the actual husk itself. It protects it from the environment. IBU is an international bittering unit, and people will talk about this and say there's no such thing. An IBU is just a frame of reference, which is true. You take a hop, and the IBUs are about hops, how bitter it is. And there's different calculations on when you go into making your own recipes online, and there's 2 or 3 different big ones that calculate what an IBU is. But it doesn't translate into the flavor of the beer. I've had beers that I've tasted that say their IBU on the can is 38. Like this one here, I think is 38. And I drink it. Here we go. Cheers, naughty neighbor. Oh man, it's good. Crisp and clean. Guess what? That doesn't taste like 38 to me. That tastes like 20. Then I've had other beers that are IPAs, which they claim this is an APA. An IPA, they'll say it's a 34, and I go, and I pucker up like I just ate a dandelion head. And then I say that's a 50. So you go from what I think is a 20 to a 50. What's an IBU? It's an international bittering unit. Doesn't mean anything. But they try to figure out something we can use to make beer, especially for us. And it's vague as far as I'm concerned. Lagering. Okay, so lager is a bottom fermented Saccharomyces, which is a yeast, and it is the difference between lagers. Let's just talk about lagers and ales. Here we are. We're talking about lager. You drink a lager, and most people know when they drink a beer. If you're not a beer person, you've drank lagers. You say, "Oh, I don't like those stronger, British ales or whatever." British beers, they're ales, mainly ales. In Germany, lagers are what ruled the roost, right? And England and those other areas, it was ales. Ales have more esters, which means they have more aroma and a little more stronger flavors. And beers that are lagered are very clean and clear, and you could drink a ton of them, which is probably why Germany wanted to have lots of lagers. Different beers we drink here, like Canadian and Bud and all those places, all those drinks, they are lagers, and they are so clean and crisp that you can just keep drinking them and keep drinking them, and all of a sudden you fall over and drunk. Okay, that's fine if that's what you want to do, but think about it. Why do you want to do that? Why not when you go to dinner? Do you just want to go to KFC and get full and go home? Or do you want to have something that actually you can sip and taste? The same as wine. You want to have the cheap wine, or do you want to have the good wine? And you want to have the wine that you sip. Now, I'm not saying that lagers are cheap, and I'm not saying that ales are rich. It's not like that. But the lagers are to be enjoyed on a more of a common drinking palate of just clean and crisp. They go with any kind of food. Ales are more like fine wines. They're more different flavors and different aromas. So it's a completely different way of doing it. But we want to get down to it. Like I said, I've gone backwards where I should have been. Is lagers are a type of yeast that sits on the bottom of the fermenter, and they take a lot longer to ferment, and they also make less esters, which the flavors and the smells, and at a low temperature. They take a lot longer to make, months. Where an ale, hey, that's why most home brewers make ales. right? You can take your ale yeast. It's pretty much easy. You throw it in. There you go. In a month, you're drinking your beer. No problem. But if you don't take care of it, you're going to get all these off banana flavors and pineapple flavors and apple flavors and whatever. And it's kind of a hit and miss if you don't know what you're doing. But that's what ales do. So lagers, they ferment on the bottom. Ales ferment on the top. That's just the basic part of it. Now let's get into lautering. So the word lauter, L-A-U-T-E-R. To lauter is a separation of solids. So when you mash out a beer, which I haven't talked about yet, that's where you have all the grains, and you've seen in my last video where there's all those grains floating around. And if you remember, if you've not watched my first video on brewing, please go back and watch it. It's where you separate all the grains from the liquid, so it comes out as crystal clear beer, which it isn't beer yet, it's wort. But you need to get all those grains out, or they're going to cause issues with the flavor and the clarity of your beer. So lautering is to remove that. It's filtering out your beer. A lot of these terms are German. The next one is Lauterton. And this got me confused when I first started brewing. Is you got Lauterton and mash tun. I have a mash tun. So my mash tun is basically a big cooler, and it has a false bottom in it. And I throw all of my grain inside of it, and I put hot water in it to a certain temperature to mash out or mash in a certain temperature to break down all of the different sugars, right? From complex starches to simple sugars. That's what the yeast can eat. And that's my mash tun. You know, I'm like, that's what you do. You put it in, you mash it, and then have a false bottom, and I push it through with gravity into my containers, and I boil it, and there you go. I make my beer. Then there's a lauter tun and a mash tun. Well, when you get into large brewing facilities, they have a lauter tun, where this basically has a false bottom, like my mash tun, that they separate the wort from the yeast, or from the spent grain. So what they do in breweries, large breweries, they have a mash tun where they mix it and have a big stir and keep stirring to make sure that all of the conversion of the sugars and everything from the grain get converted. And then they push it into what's called a lauter tun, which separates the grain from the wort. Well, when we do this, the mash tun does it all. So there is no lauter tun and mash tun. You lauter when you mash, or you mash out. So it's a little bit confusing. Again, I will do another video on that, but the term Lauterton is something that is more commercial, where you separate all of the wort from the mash. Malt is the next thing I have in front of me. Malt, well, of course, we're talking about malt, we're talking about the grains. So when you take anything that's like a grain that hasn't been malted, okay, that means that it's like really hard and tough. You can't even chew on the damn stuff. Like I buy two-row and there's Pilsner and all these different malts. It means they've been malted. It means they basically took a grain, it's cereal grain, and they've wet it very lightly, and they hold it at a low temperature of like 120, 130 degrees, and it starts to sprout, and they stop it, and then they dry it out. And so basically it converts that little grain into a sugar. It's like the little grain thinks it's about to grow into a bean or something, or whatever it's going to grow into. They stop it, but it becomes a little more tender, and it gets sugar in it, and that's what we take out of that. So there's malters out there. If there wasn't malters out there, we wouldn't have beer. So malting the grain is important. So when you buy malt, that's what you're doing. And I say I want 2-row malt, or I want 6-row malt, or whatever I want. When I say malt, it's been malted. They've taken all grain and malted it. We can't eat that stuff. It's too tough, and there's no sugar in it. There's a complex sugar in grain, but we need to be malted by a maltster. Mash is what I've also talked about. So mashing, we talked about a lauter tun and a mash tun. When you mash, that means you take your malted grain, and you've seen it in my last video. If you haven't watched it yet, go watch it. And I throw it in with a certain amount of temperature water, and it's mashing. So to mash, you may have heard about this with people that are like making whiskey or making vodka. they mash, right? So mashing is a certain temperature that you want to hit, where there's these things called alpha amylase and beta amylase. And I'm going to skip ahead of this because it should be right here. Amylase, they are basically where you have a transition of breakdown of it's an enzyme basically. So alpha enzymes, or I call them amylase, alpha and beta enzymes. They take what's in the malt and they physically change the chemical, or that they break down the complex sugars. So a complex sugar, a carbohydrate. Let's say you have a complex carbohydrate of 20 chains of sugar molecule. 20, okay? It could be more than that. Let's just say it's 20. If you ate that, you wouldn't even taste the sugar in it. Okay, you wouldn't even taste it at all. It just, you'd eat it. It's like eating a potato. If you eat a potato, would you taste sweetness? No, you wouldn't. It's still got some complexity. It's starch. So there's enzymes that will break that down. There's alpha amylase and beta amylase. So I used to get confused. I thought alpha be first and beta second. Well, if you go from the hottest to coldest, yes. So the beta, let's talk about betas. Okay, beta amylase. When you mash, if you're below 150, and I don't know how far down it goes, but let's say 140, 150, the beta amylase, they will chop up all the sugar into little tiny pieces into simple complex sugars. And the way they work is, imagine there's a complex chain of 20 long. Well, the beta comes along and it can only hold 3 of the molecules of this chain in its mouth. But when it bites down, it only bites down the last 2. So it holds the 3, bites down the last 2, and it goes away. So you got 2 sugars that move away. Those are simple sugars. A 1 and a 2 and a 3 level chain sugar, or a simple carbohydrate, a simple sugar. Those ones can be broken down by yeast, which we haven't even got to yet. Yeast can eat those and make it into alcohol. So these little guys are like Pac-Man. They can eat, they'll grab hold of only 3 at a time. They can't hold 1, 2, they gotta grab hold of 3, and you chop off the first 2 and they float away, and it does it again. So if it comes to one that has 2, it won't do anything to it. If it comes to one that has 4, it'll grab hold of the first 3, break it off, you'll get a 1 and a 2, and you got the other one. You got all simple carbohydrates. Then you've got the alphas. The alphas start around 150 degrees Fahrenheit and go up to, it's probably like around 160 or so. And they're like a samurai sword guy who's on steroids. They just chop and chop and chop and chop. They do not look at where they're chopping. So they will chop off a 4, an 8, a 10, a 12, a 1. They don't care. Okay? So what happens there? Well, if you have a complex carbohydrate that's chopped off to 5, 6, or 7, you can taste it on your palate. It's still going to taste sweet, but it won't get fermented by the yeast. The yeast will only ferment 1 or 2 or 3. They're not going to go and eat these long carbohydrate amounts. So what does that do to your tongue? You taste it, it's still sweet, but it's not alcohol. So what does that do? That makes your beer more malty and more tasteful for sweetness. If you go the other end and you mash at a lower temperature, then you're going to get these beta amylase. They're going to chop it all up into a really fine amount of carbohydrates that are super simple, and they're going to make alcohol. And it's going to give you more of a taste that's crisp. So if you're looking for like a very malty flavored beer, you're going to go above 150. You're going to go about 152, 155 degrees Fahrenheit. If you're looking for a crisp, clean beer, you're going to drop down below 150, 148, 147, 146. So that's what those do. They make the difference of how your profile is on your malt. Okay? So I just jumped forward on that, but I wanted to bring that up. Going to roasted malts is one thing I have here. Roasted malts, when we talked about malts themselves, general malts like a 2-row malt, 6-row malt, I'm not going to get into that about the genetics of those two, but tuber malt is one of the standard malts that are in most beers you drink in the States and Canada. They're in a lot of lagers. Just regular smooth drink, right? Roasted malts, now you're caramelizing the malts and they're roasting them. Like think about it, when they make a malt from barley, they roast the barley, or they malt the barley, then they can roast it longer and longer and make it caramelized. So they first malt it to make it sprout, so it gets that sugar, thinks it's about to be planted in the earth, and stop that. Now it's malted barley, and then they take some of them, they specialize them by roasting them, and they can caramelize some of them, and they can roast them in longer to make a darker malt. And you get your porters, your stouts, your red ales, and all those different flavors come out from just the heat, the temperature of roasting these things. Starch. Just read this. Starch is a molecule that many plants use to store energy. So, sugar, right? So we already talked about what starch is. It's a straight form of sugar. Well, except it is linked together with multiple amounts of molecules. So with starch, like I said before, it can be broken down even more. You may be able to taste starch on your tongue, or it may be too long of a molecule to be able to taste it at all, but that's starch. Okay, sugar, that's where it's all chopped up into different molecular amounts. You can taste sugar on your tongue. Whirlpool. Remember we talked about Whirlpool in my last video, turning the wort as I was trying to get all of the trub into the middle. That's basically a whirlpool. That's where you're going to want to get everything all set in the center. In other videos I'm going to go through about whirlpooling with hops and things like that. Wort. Wort is the sweet liquid produced by the brewing process, blah blah blah. When we've mashed and we then do our mash out, which I've shown in my last video, you're extracting all the sugars from the grain because you've used the beta and the alpha amylase. That's going to produce your wort. Before it's beer, it's wort. Simple, that's it. Yeast, I won't even get into the whole things about yeast, but yeast is basically a fungi bacteria, or fungi, it's not bacteria, it's a fungi. It's a cell organism. It's an amazing thing. I could do video after video after video on yeast. Yeast, like I said, is the most important factor to what your beer is going to end up like. I didn't realize this at the beginning, but it does. It's a huge factor. I've done 50, 60 batches of beer so far, and I've realized how much yeast takes over what your beer will be at the final end of it. It's almost like you're sitting there and you're a chef in your restaurant, not a chef, you're the cook, and you've put everything in and this and that, and you're stirring it, and you're making this amazing stew, and it's just getting to the point where you could almost say it's a stew and you have to leave now, and the chef comes in and he adds his little extra ingredients and he heats it up and does this and he adds this and he adds that at the very end. That's what yeast is. It's the chef of beer. Alright, back to the beginning, which I should have started with in the A's. And I said this in my last video. ABV, said all these different three-letter terms. Alcohol by volume. Everybody knows this if you drink alcohol. It means basically if you drink an ounce of this beer, if you drink a gallon of this beer, this is what you're going to get by volume. 5%, 6%, whatever. So ABV is alcohol by volume. An adjunct. It's any non-malt sugar source added to increase gravity and or flavor. So something that if I sit there and I mash out and I do all these mashings and everything with my grains to make the alpha and beta amylase make all these sugars, and I add something on top of that, like just throwing sugar in there, or a DME, which is dry malt extract, something that's already been done for me, that is going to be an adjunct. It's something that I didn't have to actually make alcohol or make sugar with. It's an additive. Ale. Here we go. Top fermenting Saccharomyces disease. So, like we talked about already, is an ale ferments on the top, lager ferments on the bottom. Ales ferment 65 to 72, 73 degrees. and lagers they're like below 50 usually. They take a lot longer, and they get less esters, which means basically less fruity flavors on the nose. They're very clean and crisp, which is what a lot of the breweries try to do, so that people get used to that. And it's hard for small breweries to do because they have to sit there so long waiting for it to happen. Talked about alpha acids. Okay, so we talked about amylase. Alpha acids. They're the group of compounds found in hops which are important to bitterness. So, talk about bittering. Hops. So there's different ways you can bitter your beer. You don't have to just use hops. Like I said, people throw dandelions into things. But it comes down to alpha acids, there's beta acids. Alpha acids, when you read your little hop bag, you'll see when you throw in your beer, lots of times they didn't show the beta acids, they show the alpha, because that's the bittering agent. It's going to start to change, I think, in the next few years, or maybe shorter, about alpha acids, for two reasons in my opinion. One is, alpha acids show what the bittering is going to be, which I think is subjective depending on how long you bitter with, what kind of water you're using, what kind of work it's going into. And the second one is, there's no real way to know how chemically the alpha acids are going to act with what you're putting them into. So it's a guesstimation. So you look at alpha acids, it's like basically saying, well, this tastes or smells like this. So if an alpha acid is 15 and an alpha acid is 5, you know that the alpha acid is 15 on your little bag there is going to be a bittering type of hop. If it's a 5, no, you're not going to use it as a bittering hop. So it's a suggestion of what it's going to do for your beer. So if I see a 10 or 12 or 15 of an alpha acid, that's the one I'm going to throw in for my bittering. And if it's a 5 or 6, that one I'm going to throw in the end of the boil, or in when the flame out's happening, for more of a flavor. It's a suggestion, is what I feel it is. Here's one here, bright beer. I did not really knew that what this term was. Beer that has been filtered or allowed to settle. So it's basically the beer's clear. It's a bright beer. Then there's a BBT, and I wouldn't know this term either, but it's bright beer tank. So I call it bright tank. A lot of breweries who want to get a nice clear beer like this is not a nice clear beer. This is an APA. It's trying to, I think, mimic an APA, or not, it's an APA, a NEPA, which is a New England IPA. Haven't had a sip in a while. It's cloudy. It's on purpose. It even says on the can, unfiltered. Why? People think it's fresh and natural, and therefore it's delicious. It's just marketing, but it is good. A lot of people do not want to drink something that's not crystal clear. They can't get their head around it. So a bright tank, BT, bright beer tank, is used to allow it to basically cold crash, which is what you do in home brewing, where you have the beer, it's already been fermented out, you've put it into another secondary tank, and you cold crash it, where everything settles out, and then you pull it off of that, and it's crystal clear. That's what that is. Barley. We talked about what barley is. It's basically what horses eat. It's a grain. There's rye barley. There's, what do we got here? Most common grain used in modern brewing. Three main parts of the kernel: the husk, the embryo, and the starchy endosperm. Whatever. That's what you make beer out of. Base malt. So base malt, that's like 2-row, I would call it base malt. It's a malt that is a standard flavor. It doesn't have any highs or lows in it. You can throw in, if you're going to use 10 pounds of malt in your beer and you want to make a very standard beer, you throw 8 pounds of base malt in it, and then you get specialty malts where it's a little bit of this and a little bit of that. It's like cooking. If you're going to make a pasta, you're going to throw pasta in, there's your base malt. And then you're going to add all the little flavors here and there. That's base malt. Oh, look at this one, beer. I'm not going to talk about what that is. Caramel malt, that's basically where they're taking it and they heat it up a little bit to make it caramelize a little bit, and give it different flavors because you're burning the sugar that's in the malt, because you've already gone and changed that malt from just being a regular barley. You've actually malted it, so it's got sugar in it. So you caramelize that, and you're going to get different flavors on how long you cook it, caramelize it. Endosperm, well, may as well say what that is. Making up the majority of barley kernel, the endosperm is mostly starch, but it contains the raw material needed to make a new barley plant. So that was, like I said, then when they're sitting there and they malt it, they're making it start to grow, so the plant or the little seed thinks it's going to grow, so it makes all this energy of starch, and we stop it and we use it to make beer. Enzyme, biological catalyst. Talked about beta and amylase. It's basically what breaks down all the sugars for us. Fermentation. Well, fermentation is basically what it is. And my channel, I'm going to base more on fermentation as I go, because I ferment vegetables as well naturally, and I really think it's interesting what it does. So in brewing, fermentation is a process of which in the absence of oxygen, yeast converts glucose, which is sugar, into ethanol, which is alcohol, pure alcohol, carbon dioxide, and flavor compounds. Wow, I could have told you that. But it's amazing what yeast will do for us. It's amazing we have yeast on this planet. If without yeast on this planet, I'm leaving. Fermenting vessel. Well, I use a carboy, something that you can't let the bad nasties in. So basically you're going to put your wort in there, and it's in a vessel that has been sanitized. You have the yeast in there. You let the yeast do its thing undisturbed, and when it's done, pour it out of that vessel. That's what a vessel is. Wort. Okay, so I think I said this in my last video, is wort is basically the liquid you pull out after mashing, which is with the beta and alpha amylase, that you've converted all the sugars that were in that malted barley, and you've pulled it all out. So you got this sugary sweetness. It's like beer tea. You take in a beer tea, and then you let the crazy yeast go after it and make a beer. The only difference is you've also added some hops to flavor that difference of bitters and sweetness. Yeast is last. I'm not going to go into the full understanding of yeast. That'll be another video. I want to just sign off with just this quick video with Naughty Neighbor. Just saying that I'm glad you guys have watched my videos, and I want to try and get all of the information out that I can to you guys. And if you have any questions, just put them in the comment section. If you haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe down there and click the button or the little bell so that you know when I do a new video. And I'm glad that you guys have watched this video, and thanks a lot again for watching. Cheers. Signing off, Sean, Maine Brew Channel. Thank you.